what it's all about. It's about control, just like the war. You know, like we said earlier, it's all about money, power, and control. That's what it's not about slavery. It's not about oppression. It's not about keeping our fellow Americans beat down. We need to be unified.
I agree.
We need to come together above all this mess to focus on what's really plaguing America: corrupt politicians, fitting their narrative, going against what they're trying to do. You know, that's, like I said, it's all about taxation without representation. We went to war because of that reason right there. And we got the same thing today. Ain't nothing changed. We're all slaves to the monetary system. Name one thing you can just go out there and do and be productive in America without money. There's nothing. You can get by for a little while. Sure, you can live off the land, but eventually you're going to need something. You're going to have to buy something. And when you buy something, it's taxed. We're taxed to death. By the time you die, 70% of our income by the time we die is taxed. 70%. Do you not think that there would be more uprisings if everybody knew that? 70% of what you're going to earn in your lifetime is going to be taxed. If you make enough to save, to pass down to your future generations, that's taxed too. So what's the purpose in it all? Unity. We need unity. We need to come together above all this that's dividing us and stand together as we the people, because we the people would be unstoppable.
That's why they divide us.
That's right. They want to keep us focused on, hey, look at this over here. Well, look at this over here. Well, let's think about what they thought about 170 years ago in that society's mindset. We don't think how they thought back then. Today is a different society. We're Americans. We need to stand up together and fight what's plaguing us.
So speaking about what's plaguing us, you know, why do they want our Confederate monument gone here?
Were you asking me a question?
Yeah.
What did you say? I'm sorry.
I said, why do they want our Confederate monument gone here?
Oh, they want to remove our American history. We can look back, like I said, we can look back to the Obama administration Confederate monument removal movement and see now today that was only the beginning. That was the way to get their foot in the door to remove American history. It's not about us and them. It's not about black and white. It's about politicians being corrupt, juicing their own pockets, keeping us manipulated over some little bullshit instead of focusing on what's really plaguing us. Division by political agenda. Hidden political agendas.
We're talking to Rodney Neville, who's with Company H, Missouri Sons of Confederate Veterans. Well, Sons of Confederate Veterans, Mechanical Cavalry, right?
Mechanized Cavalry.
Mechanized Cavalry, which is a SCV motorcycle club. We've also got Thrasher here.
We're not technically, we don't view ourselves as a motorcycle club.
You're not officially.
Right.
Yeah, okay. But there are a group of Sons of Confederate Veterans that ride together.
That's right.
And it's national.
That's right.
Yeah. So.
Great group of organization, a great group of guys in the organization. There's no race requirement to join the Sons of Confederate Veterans. It's not in a. The only thing that's required of you to join the Sons of Confederate Veterans is to be a descendant of a Confederate soldier that fought honorably for the Confederate military. You know, there were French, there were Spanish, there were Irish,
Black,
there were African Americans, there were, I mean, just all kind of diversity in the Confederacy. It was never about slavery and oppression.
Well, that's like Quantrell had a scout. He highly trusted scout, was a black man named John Nolan. And years later, when they had the Quantrell reunions after the war, John Nolan would go to them, and he was described as a man among men, because, like you said, it wasn't about race. They were fighting a common enemy.
That's right. They were
and they respected him.
They were invaded. You know, we can trace that back to the beginning of the war. You know, everybody's talking about, well, it was all about slavery. Well, wars start for a reason, and in the beginning, you know, when Lincoln issued his request for 75,000 volunteers, that was published in several newspapers, by the way, why didn't it say to free slaves? 75,000 volunteers to free slaves. It said 75,000 volunteers to quell the rebellion.
Yeah.
And why did he issue that? When he issued that was because the Southern militia, who was already a legally seceded sovereign nation, were invaded at a fort in South Carolina, Sumter, South Carolina, where the North took up arms and encamped in that fort on Southern soil. Why were they there? Slavery? I don't think they were there for slavery.
Well, as we were talking earlier too, a lot of people think that Lincoln sent supplies to that fort because his men were starving, but that wasn't the case. Those men were allowed to go into Charleston and buy provisions, and a lot of ladies from Charleston and people of Charleston, South Carolina, would send them provisions. They weren't starving. It was a trick to get the South to fire the first shot so the North could say we didn't do it.
Well, they were invaded on their own territory. Before the Confederate military was established, Southern militia attacked the fort for 34 hours and took it back.
Correct.
They were invaded. They fought back. Then Lincoln issues this publication asking for 75,000 volunteers to quell the rebellion. So they were occupying Southern soil, fort on Southern soil, because of slavery, right? No. And then the Southern forces fought back because of slavery, right? No. They were invaded. That was their land. Now don't get me wrong, they were all itching for a fight. But that's not what it's all about today. Today is a totally different mindset in society than it was 170 damn years ago.
Yeah. You know, there was a comment somebody made in the paper, said, Mr. Lacey, if they weren't fighting for slavery, what were they fighting for? And I went into great detail, and I'll try and shorten it up a little bit. But Governor Jackson and former Governor Sterling Price, later General Sterling Price, they had an agreement with the commander, federal commander at St. Louis, General Harney, that they would keep the peace. Harney would keep the feds in St. Louis, and the state forces would control the countryside. Well, what happened was Frank P. Blair, who was a prominent Unionist in St. Louis, his brother was Montgomery Blair, who was a member of the Lincoln administration. They went behind Harney's back and got General Lyon appointed in Harney's place. So when that happened, they had a meeting at the Planter's House in St. Louis, and it was Governor Jackson, former Governor Price, Frank Blair, Nathaniel Lyon, and their respective staffs. So when they detailed their plan to keep the peace, Lyon stood up and said, I'll see you, you, and you, pointing to everybody in the room, and every man, woman, and child in the state of Missouri dead and buried. Okay. He didn't live to see that because he was killed at Wilson's Creek. But his plan was successful because Missouri lost 1/3 of its civilian population. Now, when the regular Union troops were sent south, they brought the Union militia in to take their place, and they were poorly trained, poorly commanded in comparison to the regular forces. And a lot of these Union militia members plundered and murdered to benefit themselves, and one of them was Captain William Leeper from Wayne County, Missouri. He stole so much that he was able to open a bank up after the war. So my short answer to this guy's question, if they weren't fighting for slavery, what were they fighting for? The short answer is they were fighting for their lives.
Independence, freedom.
Yeah, and
they had already seceded as a sovereign nation before Lincoln was even elected president by the northern states, because there weren't any southern votes that elected Lincoln.
No. And another tidbit of information, after the Planter's House meeting, Union troops were going to invade Jefferson City, Missouri capital. So the elected officials of Missouri, the elected representatives and state senators, they evacuated Jefferson City and took the seal with them, at which time the North claimed they abandoned their post. Well, what were they supposed to do? There was an army coming for them. So they had the Battle of Wilson's Creek, and after that, now General Sterling Price took Lexington, Missouri. But he didn't have the men to hold it, so they retreated back to southwest Missouri. And October 31st, 1861, the Missouri State Legislature, which was in exile now because they'd been ran out, passed the Ordinance of Secession. And November 28th, 1861, they were accepted in the Confederate States of America. Another little tidbit of information. From about 1862 on, Marshall, Texas was the capital of Missouri. Not a lot of people know that. So anyway, I just wanted to interject that. Please proceed.
Oh man, it's I don't know. It's everything we hadn't been talking about for years, and it's all, it all boils down to it's no longer just Confederate monuments. It's American history that's being removed.
Yeah, well, they proposed moving this monument to Lorimer Cemetery, which that's better than being in storage, and it does have a fence secured around it. The only problem is you have to make an appointment to go to Lorimer Cemetery. So if they do that, and we want to be clear, we don't want this monument moved, but if they do, that cemetery needs to be open during the day and locked up at night. And the only other position I would say that we would take is that there doesn't need to be a plaque, quote unquote, putting this memorial in context to, you know, tell everybody that they were evil slaveholders